Please remain standing as you are for today's gospel reading, which I was fiddling with because I forgot to put it in my script today. Today's gospel reading is from Mark chapter 3, verses 20 through 35. And he came home, and the crowd gathered again to such an extent that they could not even eat a meal. And when his own people heard about this, they came out to take custody of him, for they were saying, he has lost his senses. The scribes who came down from Jerusalem were saying, he is possessed by Beelzebub, and he has cast out demons by the ruler of the demons. And so he called them to himself and began speaking to them in parables. How can Satan cast out Satan? And if a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. If a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. And if Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but he is finished. But no one can enter the strong man's house and plunder his property unless he first ties up the strong man, and then he will plunder his house. Truly I say to you, all sins will be forgiven, the sons and daughters of men, and whatever blasphemies they commit. But whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit never has forgiveness, but is guilty of an eternal sin, because they were saying, he has an unclean spirit. Then his mother and his brothers came, and while standing outside, they sent word to him, calling for him. And a crowd was sitting around him, and they said to him, behold, your mother and your brothers are outside looking for you. Answering them, he said, who are my mother and my brothers? And looking around at those who were sitting around him, he said, here are my mother and my brothers, for whoever does the will of God, this is my brother and sister and mother. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. So today's sermon puts lots of thoughts in my head, and quite frankly, I rewrote it twice and probably could rewrite it again, or could probably put this away and just start extemporaneously speaking and go on for hours. So I'm keeping it concise. Who is in and who is out? We are family. I open this reflection with a direct quote from Sermon Seeds, a UCC online resource, because it sums up all that is happening so well. It says, quote, the scene from the early part of Jesus' ministry, right after he has chosen his 12 apostles, feels almost as chaotic to read about as it must have seemed to those gathered around Jesus. It might be helpful to get a sense of how the Gospel of Mark itself feels. Mark's Gospel is a little bit different than the others. It's no leisurely story with nice long sermons and extended conversations. You know, if you think about Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, the woman at the well, or the story of Nicodemus in John. But Mark's Jesus is on the move constantly. Like a man on a mission with little time to spare and even less patience with people who like to criticize everything he does. We're only in the 3rd chapter right now of Mark, but a quick read of those first chapters is exhausting. Jesus has gone from his hometown to the wilderness, to Galilee, back to the sea, to Capernaum, to a house, to a deserted place, and back out of the towns of Galilee in just the first chapter. And then back to Capernaum and home, and then to the sea, and to Levi's house, and through the grain fields, and to a synagogue, and back to the sea, and into a boat before heading up the mountain where he gathers those 12 apostles around him. And then finally, he goes home. I think he got his steps in. I know he's doing a little better than I am. Imagine all this travel with a desperate crowds around him to add to it. From every quarter, it says, clinging to him, begging for healing, begging to be released from the demons that had hold of them, and then picture a group of carping critics following right behind him, complaining about breaking the rules of breaking rules about healing on Sabbath, eating with tax collectors and sinners, not fasting as they should. In other words, finding it more lawful to meet human need than to let human suffering go on unnecessarily. Jesus understood the heart of God's law. Of course, I think we can understand that the crowds couldn't help themselves. Who among us wouldn't want to do whatever it took to get our sick child healed, or take it to a healer who has done amazing things being attributed to Jesus? Still, it's poignant to see how Jesus couldn't even go home and have a nice, quiet meal. And in that day and age, that practice of having a meal together was really important. We talked about the meal and how it's a religious law, practically. In chapter 2, people dig through his roof and drop a paralyzed person right down next to him, hoping for a cure. And after admiring their faith and handling the criticism of the scribes, when he forgives the man's sins, Jesus tells the man to get up and walk. That amazes the crowd and, of course, makes Jesus even more sought after. But it really gets the attention of the powers that be, which explains why they're back again, all the way from Jerusalem, here in the 3rd chapter, as Jesus tries once more to go into a house for a break from all this activity. The problems with the crowd control persists, so much so that Jesus can't even have supper with his friends, his disciples. But he isn't surrounded only by people who are willing to admit their brokenness and their need, along with those institutional critics who are suspected at this time. He is also has his family just outside the door. His mother and his brothers who can't even get inside the house and talk to him face to face. And one point it says, they're there to get him, to take him out. So Jesus' family, we do not know exactly what prompted Jesus' mother and brothers to come and, give him a talking to or try to. But it may have been the stirring up of the crowds. Jesus was changing the conversation around sin and heaven, and it scared some people. It worried those in power because he was gathering so much power. A group of people following you around is power, especially in a small area like that. They might have just been scared for him. It may have been that they felt he needed a break. They were trying to find any excuse to get him out and away. We just don't know. But here in the midst of bickering and crowds and confusion and family trying to push in and other people probably yelling, hey, we were here first, and no, you're wrong about Jesus. You're wrong about Jesus. Jesus, heal me. Jesus, teach me. In the middle of the confusion, someone pauses and says, hey, Jesus, your family's here. Jesus paused, looked around him, and said, you are my family. Right here, right now, you are my family. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and my sister and my mother. This text reveals a startling truth that even Jesus had family problems. The dynamics that happen with familial relationships are part of the human condition. Evidence of this can even be found within the gospel passage highlighted this week. Family may be defined by bloodlines of ancestry, secured by formal or informal adoption, or expanded to include ties voluntarily bound to be like family. There's an old saying, you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family. As an expression, this gets just proven by groups of people in small and large units as well as biblical witness. The family of Jesus, his mother and brothers, make their way through much of the crowd to reach the outside door of the house where Jesus was sitting. Scholars note that even such a small detail as the house is important. House, Judith Hockray says, is the key word here, and the understanding of who is on the inside and who is on the outside is central to the meaning of this passage. Who is inside and who is outside of the house? Who is inside or outside the church? That is the question that comes at me from so many different ways. And it brings pain, joy, understanding, and confusion all at once. I recall a time when I was paying a bit more attention to this, maybe it's because it's Pride Month that brings everything back. I don't know. But there was one time, I think it started on Facebook, someone asked, what is cisgender? They wanted to know what it meant. And a person who I call a sister of mine, Ryan Ashley Caldwell, she's a psychiatrist and also a professor at USC, University of Southern California. She says it's when the gender you were assigned at birth actually matches the cultural gender expectations for presentation once older. It's as if you're saying yes to your assigned at birth gender. Of course, all this assumes a binary system and not a queer identity. Now, I said, that's a great description. It's all very scientific, but it's kind of a neat little package until one person says, labels used to divide and separate, he announces on Facebook. I pointed out there are more terms to help understand and lift up and celebrate our glorious differences, the way God made us. He didn't like that too much in the conversation and went on. He said, the less united we are as a population through divisive labels, the more manipulation can occur by the media and the more control can occur by the government. We can no longer be, and just put whoever name you want in there. I can no longer be Joe. I can identify by those that know me with my quirks and foibles. We now have to be known by our labels. Race, color, religion, national origin, age, sex, pregnancy, citizenship, familial status, disability, veteran, genetic information, and yes, all the above are protected with the only class of people remaining without protection are white males 19 to 39 years of age, unless they are a religion other than Christian, are married, are disabled, or a veteran. That's a quote. So I'm assuming from this post that this young man is probably a white male between the age of 18 and 39, single, and considers himself a Christian. Yikes. Who is in and who is out? Who's my family? June 4th was a pride flag raising from Hart Plaza in Detroit, my hometown. Now, when I was young and in Detroit, and I mean young, I came out at the age of, started coming out process at the age of 18, and by the age of 20, I was out and active. We could barely have a pride rally on the university grounds as a safe place, in fear of retaliation. And now they have pride flag with the mayor present and council people present. It's really amazing to see how far some communities have come, and yet the ACLU is tracking 515 anti-LGBT plus laws, pieces of legislation across this country today. Seems outrageous. And just a few years ago, a minister who was serving in a UCC church shared some pain. She said, one Sunday during my sermon, I revealed that I was transgender and transitioning. She says, I should begin by saying we are no NA congregation, and the leadership of the church already knew I was transgender. The initial response from the congregation was positive or supportive or neutral. I heard nothing that was negative to my face. All day Monday, I was in the office and not a word was said to me about my revelation. There was a great deal more silence in my presence than normal from the church staff who are also on council. She also says, I know, bad idea, small congregation, old practices. I found out last night, she says, that now this was a couple of years ago, she had found out that the council president had called the association's general minister to attend their council meeting that evening, and did so without consulting other folks. She was asking for prayers that night, that it would be civil, that love will prevail, and that God's will be done. I reached out to her, and she basically said, I am treading water right now. It did work out fine. No one should have to tread water in the United Church of Christ, or any church for that matter. This type of thing is unacceptable, and yet it goes on day after day, sometimes in more subtle ways. If we hire a gay pastor, they will turn us into a gay church. If the pews are full, do you really care who's sitting in them? By definition of the United Church of Christ, we don't. Yet it can be a concern. It's okay to be a gay pastor, just don't talk about it. Yeah, I never would walk through the doors of that church. Oh, here's one I got myself from the LAPD, the LA Police Department. As I was being approved to serve as a chaplain for them, they said, please do not evangelize your openly gay agenda. A friend of mine, an artist, a singer, once put out little notepads that he would sell at his concerts. And it said, the gay agenda, queer things to do today, and it was blank. You could fill in whatever you wanted. So I'm really not sure what it means for a gay agenda. To this day, there are 64 countries that criminalize the same-sex relations. There are 40 countries, wow, why'd you jump up? There are 40 countries that criminalize private consensual sexual activity between women. There are 12 countries that have jurisdictions in which the death penalty is imposed or at least possible for private consensual same-sex activity. At least 6 of these implement the death penalty: Iran, Northern Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, and Yemen. And the death penalty is a legal possibility in Afghanistan, Brunei, Mauritania, Pakistan, Qatar, the UAE, and Uganda. 14 countries criminalize the gender identity or expression of transgender people using so-called cross-dressing, impersonation, and disguise laws. One other note about this week, this Sunday. Today they are celebrating Pride in Los Angeles and probably a few other cities around the country. The Pride in LA was founded by Christian ministers. Reverend Rob Humphreys, founder of the United States Mission, Morris Knight, a founder of the Gay Liberation Front, and Reverend Troy Perry, the founder of the Metropolitan Community Church. They came up with the idea as a way to commemorate the 1-year anniversary of the Stonewall uprisings. But before all the festivities today, down there, thousands of people got on bicycles and rode from San Francisco, riding all week 545 miles to Los Angeles, and raised over $11 million. They do it every year for the San Francisco AIDS Foundation and the LGBT Center in LA to provide life-saving services to minority populations. You know, the average white gay guy doesn't need to go into these places to find services. We have jobs and we have insurance, and we're usually pretty safe. But the minority populations get turned away, don't have jobs that offer insurance, don't have protections. Usually I donate every year. I missed this year, so that means I have to do it twice as much last year. But last night, the last night of the ride, they all gather at the beach, and they have a candlelight vigil for all those who have passed. It's really an amazing thing to see, or even more amazing to participate in. And yet on the opposite end of that, the House Republicans passed a bill for funding vet services, and attached to it were bills that denied gender-affirming care for veterans, and a rule saying that vet services cannot fly a rainbow flag anywhere on government property. We'll give you money as long as you don't care for everyone. For generations, the LGBTQ community and many others have sought out their own kind, like-minded people and declared them family. A family of choice, a family of necessity, just as Jesus did in the gospel reading today. I saw a wonderful meme yesterday which answers a question so often heard: when is there going to be a straight pride, or why isn't there a straight pride? The meme says, straight pride would be equivalent to having soup kitchens for the rich. Every day is straight pride. Every day you can safely walk down the street. But this year, as we announced last week, every time there's a pride gathering, we need police presence because there are violence threatened against the community. This is why we are an open and affirming congregation, and why the O&A movement is so crucial. To this day, only about a third of the UCC churches are intentionally proclaiming to be ONA. The gay community is a family. We are a family of loving and supporting Christians, and we live in a community that needs healing and safe places for all families. I pray that we continue to reach out and let everyone know that is just who we are. And so we will seek out opportunities to reach out to the marginalized community, but not just the LGBTQ community, of course. That's why there's still Black Lives Matter is important. That's why reaching out to our Latin brothers and sisters is important. Reaching out to the poor is important. Reaching out to development and those with different disabilities or abilities is important. We take one Sunday out of the year to celebrate Pride. So all this goes away. It may come out again in October, which is LGBT History Month, and actually the local big pride's going on. But twice a year, no harm done, no foul, a safe proclamation of what we claim to be the ONA Church. May you have time to celebrate your families, whether it's a family of choice or the family you're stuck with. Take the day and just love your family a bit. Amen.